everyone. Welcome to, I don't actually know how many times we've done this, but the many-time anniversary of the Alamo Breast Cancer Advocate Program that we've done in collaboration with FDA Oncology Center of Excellence. We're very excited to be here with you, those of you in the room and those of you watching the live stream. We're going to be together for about 75 minutes today, and this session is entirely for your benefit. In terms of being driven by your questions, and very much for our benefit in terms of being able to hear from all of you what you think is important, things that you think that we should know, things that you think that we should be doing better. So I'm going to give everyone up here an opportunity to introduce themselves on the panel, and then we'll start by taking questions. Just a couple of ground rule issues. If you would like to ask a question, please go to the microphone. This is being live streamed, but your question will not be audible, even though it might be audible to the room. It won't be audible to the people on the live stream unless you're mic'd. So please do go to the microphone if you're physically able. If you're not, I feel you. And we'll figure that out. We'll repeat your question from up here. And when you do go to the microphone, please give your name, and if you're representing an organization, your organization. We will ask speakers to limit themselves to one question at a time at the microphone, just to ensure that we have an opportunity to get to everyone's questions in the room and online. And for those of you who are online, we will be able to see your questions on the screen, and so please do put those in. We will see those and take them. So without further ado, we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Tatiana Prowell. I'm a medical oncologist, breast cancer scientific liaison at the FDA in Division of Oncology 1, and associate professor of oncology at Johns Hopkins, where I staff the Second Opinion Breast Cancer Clinic. And I'll maybe go to you and then to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Marat Shah, and I'm a medical oncologist at FDA, specializing in breast and gynecologic malignancies. We are actually also the group that oversees supportive oncology products, so really excited to talk about supportive oncology topics with you all also. And thank you all for being here. I think without exception, this is the breast team's favorite thing that happens at San Antonio. We really get a lot out of this session with you, and really looking forward to the conversation today.
Hi, I'm Christy Osgood, and I'm a pediatric oncologist, but I am the acting supervisory associate director for the Division of Oncology 1 at the FDA, where we oversee the breast oncology as well as supportive care, like Marat said. And I have to second what she said about this being one of our favorite sessions, and how much we learn from you all and appreciate you all being here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Preeti Narayan. I'm a clinical team lead on the breast and gyne team at the FDA, and also a medical oncologist. Same thing, this is one of my favorite things to participate in, and it's really nice to see familiar faces in the room, and so I'm really excited for the discussion we're gonna have.
Hi, my name is Flora Mulkey. I'm a biostatistician with the FDA CEDAR. I do support Division of DO1, which is the breast and gynecologic malignancies. And this is my first time here. It's been a great experience so far. I look forward to the discussion today.
I'm Bindu Lingam. I'm a medical oncologist and hematologist and a clinical reviewer in DO1. I joined the FDA in July of 2021 after many years in clinical practice. I still see patients on the inpatient side at Georgetown, and just finished a 2-year stint at the NCI Thoracic Clinic.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melanie Royce, and it is a delight to be here. I have been attending the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium since 1997. The meeting advocates is really a privilege, in my opinion. I've been in practice before I joined the FDA for close to 20 years, and I joined the FDA in the latter part of 2019. It's a shift in career, but something I also enjoy, learning about regulatory science, and to share those knowledge with you today and learn from you as well.
Great. All right, so with introductions now out of the way, we will move on to your questions. I know that there are a lot. We received some in advance via email that people were interested to have answered. I actually don't have a list of those here, but I encourage you to ask those questions at their microphone or send them online if you're participating virtually so everyone can hear them. And I think we have only one microphone, right? Okay, great. So I can't see you, so I'm sorry that I can't, if I don't recognize you by name, but I know you, I'm not being offensive. There's a light right behind you, but please introduce yourself.
Okay. And you're short, and the microphone is very tall. So, hi, I'm Meryl Weinreb. I'm with Komen Advocates in Science. And I'm sure some of you recognize that yesterday there was a really lovely presentation about adverse events in some of these new drugs. And there was a bit of a discussion in this meeting that right now drugs are approved at a dose where they're considered sort of the maximum dosage that is quote unquote tolerable. But once we get out into the real world, we're beginning to realize that that's not really what's going on. Clinicians are learning, like for example, with certain medications that they can significantly reduce the dosage and therefore reduce the amount of AEs, but that's off-label. And clearly, we're not maybe doing the right thing when we're working on new drug development to come up with a drug that is at the dose that's the most effective, not necessarily the dose that is quote-unquote most tolerable. And I'm wondering what you all are thinking about, and I know there's some initiatives, and I'd be interested to hear your views on that.
Sure. I think that I can start with that question. Thanks very much. All of us, I would say at FDA Oncology, agree with you wholeheartedly about some of the issues with the tolerability of drugs at approved dosages. I want to preface what I'm going to say about what we're doing at FDA to say that it's really important for us to hear perspectives like this. It's perspectives like these over the years at interactions like this that really were part of the stimulus for Project Optimus, which is the FDA Oncology Center of Excellence effort to improve how dosages are selected for oncology products. I didn't mention in the beginning that I'm the clinical lead for Project Optimus, and our goal is really to reform this dosing paradigm that you're describing, where drugs are approved at kind of the maximum tolerated dosage, and we learn later that they have significant issues with things like diarrhea or nausea or other things that are extremely, extremely bothersome at those approved dosages. So what we're trying to achieve through Project Optimus is that multiple dosages are looked at earlier in drug development. Things like patient-reported outcomes are built into how safety and tolerability are assessed at those different dosages, so that when a large trial is being done and the drug is being approved, that dosage is something that's been optimized because different options have been considered earlier in drug development. I also see a lot of familiar faces in the audience from the Patient-Centered Dosing Initiative, and it's been really meaningful to, thanks for waving. Yeah, so it's been really, really meaningful to work with you all and learn from you all over the past few years.
Yeah, I think just a couple of things that I'll add to that, because I know that some of you serve on IRBs, or you meet with companies, or you review grants and so forth. So I want to put these ideas out there to you as things that you can take forward. I think that one of our issues is that drug development, dose selection has historically been based on the initial drugs that were developed and approved in oncology, which were chemotherapy drugs. And there were a few unique aspects of those that have led to the way dose was selected and the way it's still done. And that was, one, we didn't expect them to work very long. And so using the first cycle dose-limiting toxicities, meaning what do you see in that first 4 weeks or so people are on the drug, became the standard for deciding whether or not the dose was too high or not. That, I would argue, is much less relevant at a time when patients are going to take drugs for a year and a half or many years or something, right? That first cycle DLT, dose-limiting toxicity, is not as relevant anymore. That's feedback that you can take back when you see those kind of proposals in phase 1 studies. The other thing that I would say is I would encourage companies that you're working with or consulting for to think about what toxicities actually define the maximum tolerated dose, because these have historically, again, been things that were toxicities we saw with chemotherapy, and fairly severe things. Mm-hmm. I would argue that if you have low-grade diarrhea that goes on and on and on, that might actually be more important to you than the acute risk of something like a very low blood count. that might be extremely low, but pop back up quickly. And nonetheless, that could define the dose and not that more chronic, diarrhea, chronic everyday nausea that doesn't result in anyone dying or anyone being hospitalized, but certainly impacts your quality of life a lot. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything. This is such a rich topic. We could honestly talk about dose the whole hour.
We could.
I would add that to the point of tolerability and how we're assessing that, there has been a push recently, a large push, and we're considering how to analyze this data. We have the side effect bother question on multiple different PRO instruments, and there's been a great bit of interest in figuring out how to use that information, how to incorporate it into, as Marat mentioned, the dose finding studies, as well as even later on to just get a more patient-centric idea of how that patient is responding to the therapy, if it's going to cause them to come off the therapy or not, and how we can incorporate that into our decision making as well.
So let me add something that is towards dose, but not necessarily related to Project Optimus, but to another initiative that we have, which is called Project Renewal. And that really speaks in terms of dose for those drugs that are already approved. Let me give you an example, Xeloda or capecitabine. We now updated that label to reflect the doses that are commonly used in breast cancer, for instance, rather than the initially approved dose, which none of my patients can tolerate, I can tell you that. So that too is another initiative that reflects dose, and that we are cognizant that dose is maybe an evolving thing and not just the approved dose immediately. So those are important to actually give us as post-marketing feedback.
Yeah, one last thing I'll just add about this, and then we can go on to the next question. The other thing I'll add is that we have historically classified adverse events in clinical trials using something called CTCAE. This is clinician reported, so even though it's patient experienced and clinician observed, or you might tell your clinician, the clinician is the one actually grading it and reporting it. There is something called PRO CTCAE, patient-reported outcomes CTCAE, where these adverse events are actually directly patient-reported. And I would personally like to see much more use of that in these very early phase trials, because that is where dose selection occurs. Right. I've mostly, to the extent that we've seen that be used, I've mostly seen it be used in those larger, later phase 3 trials. And while I still care about that data a lot, in those bigger studies, we're not getting the opportunity to get that data until a dose has kind of been locked in, at which point it's a little bit late. So just, again, a piece of feedback for any of you advising anybody developing early, doing early phase development. We'll have our next speaker, I think that's Kelly from the hair, but I can't tell.
Shanahan, Board of Directors of Mediviver, not dead yet, with metastatic breast cancer for 10 years and 3 weeks. My question relates to, and first of all, thank you guys for that amazing how the sausage is made when it came to how you made your decision regarding elacestrant. There was a lot of disappointment in the metastatic breast cancer community and people on IM fulvestrant to potentially have the option of an oral medication. So my question is, from a regulatory standpoint, how can we take into consideration non-inferiority in an arm in a trial that's a superiority trial that's not designed to be an inferiority trial? I understand inferiority trials tend to require much larger numbers of patients, but is there a way to take that into consideration if another arm demonstrates non-inferiority, where that could then be utilized by real people in the real world who are sick of getting shots in their cheeks you don't smell with every month?
Laura?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge if the design is not set to answer that question. And I think we do take that information into account when we're making our risk-benefit assessment, but to be able to use that information to answer the question you're suggesting you would want answered with it, it's just not set up to do that, and you would need a non-inferiority design to answer that question. And so, it's a challenge, again, I hate to say that word, but it is very challenging to make those conclusions, even though it appears like something may be working or it might have a beneficial treatment effect. We can't answer that question with that design.
Yeah, the non-inferiority studies require really large sample sizes. Because if you're trying to determine, I want to make sure that people understand this because I heard that comment a lot. I saw it on Twitter from a bunch of people saying we wish that the elacestrant, the study that supported approval had been a non-inferiority study. I see like everybody's nodding. I see Stephanie nodding. People are nodding. So let me explain why I don't think that that's a better option. So non-inferiority studies are really large studies, and what they are designed to do is show that the new treatment doesn't lose more than some certain amount that you've decided in advance is an acceptable amount of efficacy to lose. So for example, in a prevention setting, if you wanted to just have like a super tolerable tamoxifen kind of drug where you're going to take a high-risk population and take it, you might be willing to have something that works just 50% as well as tamoxifen if it had 0 side effects, so that every high-risk person would take it without question, right? But if you're talking about treating patients in an adjuvant setting, where the difference between working and not working is maybe relapsing with metastatic disease, you will be willing to tolerate a much smaller loss of efficacy and have that still be considered acceptable. Is everyone with me so far? Yeah? Okay. So that amount of loss of efficacy that you're willing to tolerate is called the non-inferiority margin. It's set at a certain percentage amount. And when we're talking about doing a trial in the metastatic setting, where, again, the significance of a drug not working is very important, right? This might be the difference between living and dying. We are trying to detect a pretty small difference that is not lost, and that requires a big study to do it. So the problem with doing a superiority study and then trying to go backwards, kind of what Kelly's suggesting, go backwards and say, well, it wasn't superior in some group, but it looks pretty similar. The problem is that study isn't big enough to conclude that that's really true. You might be concluding that because you just don't have enough patients to see the difference, right? I'll give you a super extreme example. No one's ever going to do a study with just like 4 patients in it, right? But this will make the point. If you did a study with just 4 patients, and you saw that this new treatment worked just as well as the other one, you could say, yep, it's non-inferior, but you'd have no confidence in those results, right? So that's a very extreme example of what I'm talking about. A superiority study is not large enough to make a non-inferiority conclusion. These two treatments are pretty close. Does that make sense? Is everybody with me? Yeah. So that's the issue. But Kelly, I understand what you're saying, and we are sensitive to the fact that it's not just about how well the drug works, and it's not just about the side effects, that there are other issues that really matter to patients, like route of administration, for people who don't like shots, for people who have trouble getting into their doctor for whatever reason, childcare, transportation, living in a rural area. We are sensitive to that. And so I think that we will see more drug development. We are already seeing more drug development of drugs of that type, but you do have to be sure that the efficacy signal in that whole population or the marker negative population is big enough to offset the toxicity.
I think there's nothing more than, I would say from our perspective, there's nothing more that we want than an oral option for you all when the other, particularly when the other option is IM, because we know it's painful. We know that you can run out of places for it to be able to be given to you. Yeah. We know all of that, and there's nothing more that we want. But we don't want to have something on the market that everybody thinks is a replacement for a long-standing therapy that we know works, that we're not sure works for everybody in that population. And we also balance in that setting, like I just listed the side effects of the sub-Q, but in the case of elacestrant, there's low-grade nausea, there's issues with dyslipidemia. It doesn't, just because it's oral doesn't mean it's necessarily safer or more tolerable. It might just be treating one set of issues for another. So I think we have to be really careful in those settings, although we want nothing more than some oral SERD that works just like fulvestrant to come on the market and have that be a replacement for you all. We just haven't seen it yet. But I think that that's kind of the case with that.
I just want to, I agree completely, and I just want to add on to that. I agree, it's a little tangential, but sometimes now when we're meeting with drug companies to say, okay, if you really believe it's going to work in everybody, design your study that way. Maybe power the subgroups formally, test it so that we have more confidence. Because, like everybody said before, the problem is we really want to see those drugs that work and put them out there for patients, but you don't want to sort of rely on something where we don't know if the results are reliable, and then put that out there. So that's the push. Now, if you really believe in your drug and you want to test it in many different populations, biomarker positive, biomarker negative, then kind of really power that robustly so that when we look at those results, we have more confidence behind it. Because we're going to see more and more of these biomarker-driven precision therapy, which is what we want to see, but we have to be careful. And is really this the population that this drug is working in, or is this an artifact? So.
And when we're talking about powering it, we mean enroll a bunch of patients in it.
Sorry.
Enroll. You need a bigger study.
And statistically, maybe.
Laura, I feel like we have all these statisticians on the stage.
That's because you're teaching us. You're teaching us. You're training.
We have been blessed to learn from our biostats colleagues, so we can play them on TV when we need. We're not used to getting to have one on stage, so we have to keep the standards.
We're very glad we have her today.
Can I add one comment to the discussion? With oral therapies and with this conversation we're having on dosage and dosage selection, some of the other issues we're seeing with oral therapies, and this is general, this is not focused on one specific product, is that companies are only looking at them when people are, on an empty stomach and not looking at them, taking them with food. Sometimes the pills are very large and companies might not be considering, these are large pills, and then they're asking people to take a lot of them. So just other things to perhaps, point out to companies if you're advising them to really consider early, what will, if this drug gets approved, will people be able to take it easily? How will this help them maintain the best quality of life, if it's proven to be safe and effective?
On top of those issues, sometimes if it has a very strange dosing schedule, I think that can lead to potential issues for you all, like remembering to take, I don't have cancer and I don't have to take medicines for that, but just remembering to take my daily medicines can be hard. And so I think if you're taking it 4 days and not for 3 days, it can sometimes be hard to remember. So that's all part of the tolerability for you all as well.
All right, so we'll go on to the next question. I'm sorry, I can't see who that is.
My name's Terry Palastro, and I'm a patient advocate for the Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance. And I am a patient living with metastatic breast cancer. And I'd like to talk about dose intervals. So for someone who's been on trastuzumab for a really long time, I have been pushing for them to do some clinical trial on expanding from a 3-week dose to possibly 4 or 6. And I know that there's the stop HER2, but some of us have tried that. That doesn't work. And then, they're doing this new one called Sappho, which they're just giving all the drugs up front. And I haven't had all those drugs, and I'm saving them for when I need them. But man, this really keeps my life in check with having to get an infusion every 3 weeks. Or now I am, but same thing, you gotta go, you gotta wait for the pharmacy, you gotta draw it. I've already got a port, I'm not, gonna change that. So do you have any suggestions for how I could advocate for that better? Because I don't think pharma's gonna pay for it, and I'm not sure, but man, it would be great for patients, and to be honest, for insurance companies as well. They don't have to pay for as much. And I'm looking for a way to do a better job with that. Better quality of life for us living with that disease.
Fantastic.
It's a fantastic.
We agree. Do you want to take it?
I don't know if I have. I agree with you. Oh, go ahead. Actually, did you?
Melanie, Preeti, Bindu, anybody?
Go ahead.
Please. Just want to make sure everyone's speaking.
I guess
I have a comment.
I can start. I think trastuzumab hasn't been studied that way. They've done other, that I know of, the other drugs. There's another drug, Zometa, which they've, it's given for, bone metastasis, and after a certain interval, you can spread it out. And there are no studies right now that prove that you can increase, change the frequency of trastuzumab, and it's still effective. And it's a very effective drug for HER2-positive breast cancer, so why change something that works really well if you're tolerating it? It's a very effective drug and really changed the way you treat HER2-positive breast cancer.
Yeah. We hear you.
No, we hear you. Yeah, I think it's. I think that's an important point. I think I know there are other drugs like immunotherapies where they have tried longer dosing schedules. So I think being what you said, advocating from your perspective, kind of putting that pressure, on the sponsors, whoever's studying this, why can't we try to study it? Because you're right, we do need data. But I think it could be warranted trying that in a well-controlled trial, because again, if they can prove that it's equivalent, that they've developed some way to give it that is a longer duration, but is still, and we have had some labeling changes for immunotherapies based on that.
Yeah.
So
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is I don't even know if you couldn't talk to some of the advocacy groups to see if they could fund a trial, because I don't even know how big it would honestly have to be, because I don't know what trastuzumab is a relatively older drug. I mean, it's not that old, but it's a relatively older drug compared to some of the stuff we're seeing today. But I think that, it wouldn't, depending on what sort of pharmacokinetic data we already have, to just, change the dose, it wouldn't necessarily have to be one of these large non-inferiority trials or a large superiority trial to see, like, is this, spreading it out by this. It could just be based on PK data, and I don't know if you could go to one of the larger advocacy groups that maybe focuses on HER2-positive breast cancer to try to fund a trial. To see if they could do it and ask for the, to see if the sponsor would at least be willing to give the drug to the trial. I don't know if you would be able to push the sponsor to do the trial, but there's certainly, and you could have that advocacy group come talk to the FDA about talk to our clinical pharmacology colleagues to see how large of a trial would you actually need to have enough evidence to show that you could actually change up the schedule and we could put that schedule in the label.
This might be a place where the cooperative groups
that's
would
what
be
I was
of
gonna say.
help, because
Yeah.
I think that it's a big ask.
NCI.
Yeah.
It's a big ask, for advocacy or anybody to fund something like this. But I do think it's right when she's talking about PK data. She's really talking about kind of blood levels of the medicine. And as somebody alluded to, pharma is not motivated to do this themselves because it's, to be blunt, it's against their commercial interest to show that you don't need to give their drug as often, right?
yeah.
I mean, it's just a fact, right? And so you're probably going to need someone else to fund that study.
Right.
I think the additional challenge here is that once a patent has expired, and so you've got a product that's, what we would normally consider sort of generics, but in that kind of product is called biosimilars. Once you have a product that's off patent, it's not even really clear who the sponsor is that you would go to say, hey, you guys should study this. So this is a place where I think groups like the Alliance would be worth approaching to say, hey, would you consider doing a pharmacokinetic study or what we call a PK study to see whether or not it might be possible to space out the dosing? Because I absolutely agree with you. While I would love to have it be 6 weeks or something, honestly, even 4 weeks, is a great help. Like things that coincide with something else you might need to be there to do. For example, like you're getting denosumab Xgeva for your bone mets. You got to go every 4 weeks. If you're also on something that's every 3 weeks, now you're constantly at the doctor, right? And so I do think there's a lot of value to this from a patient, so sort of quality of life, logistics standpoint. So we hear you on this, and I don't think it's an insurmountable problem. I don't think you need a huge clinical study.
Yeah, that's
this might not be something that supports a labeling change either. This might be just data that ends up being out in the public and clinicians act on it. Like Zometa was that situation for bone metastases that was intended to be given monthly, and then studies were done showing non-inferiority to giving it every 3 months, and clinical practice just sort of, changed to do that. Insurance generally isn't going to complain about needing to pay for fewer administrations of drugs, so you don't really run into those problems there in the same way that you might with giving something more often or giving something certainly in an indication where it's not approved.
Sorry, I always have the last comment, sorry about that. I just had one thing to add, which is that, so pembrolizumab, a few of my colleagues are alluding to how the dosing of pembrolizumab was kind of extended to a longer interval during COVID. And I think I and many others were hoping that one of the things that we would keep from the COVID times was ways to minimize contact with the healthcare system. Things like FDA did a lot of, advising companies and advising people running clinical trials for ways that, more flexibilities could be built in that wouldn't necessarily compromise those clinical trials. Same thing with the pembrolizumab dosing, can we extend that interval? So I think maybe, even a few years ago, there might not have been as much appetite for something like this. I think one of the things that we as a society or oncology community really could keep from COVID is ways to minimize contact with the healthcare system in as many ways as possible.
So can I just make a quick comment? I think there are many ways to skin a cat, right? If the inconvenience of having to come frequently, actually drug developers are cognizant of this as well. If you remember when we used to give chemotherapy and then the patient comes back the following day to get their Neulasta, now you can just put on a device and you don't have to come back the following day. Pertuzumab, trastuzumab is given in a combination, and there's now a body device. It's called Phesgo, where it still needs sort of a supervised delivery, but that is not to say that a very smart, if it's well taught to patients, your caregiver or you yourself could put the device on, provided that we know you have no infusion-related reactions to the drug, et cetera, things that we need to be careful about. So it's not just from doing another study to do it. What they need to do is what we call a human factor study, so that the errors of drug delivery and all those stuff do not happen.
All right, we'll take the next question from the microphone.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Jill Canales, and I am part of the Memorial Care Cancer Institute. Excuse me, I run a lay peer navigation program that's on site. I also am on the board of directors for the Pink Journey Foundation. Let me start out by saying I am not a metastatic breast cancer patient. I had triple-negative breast cancer 14 years ago, and I'm fortunate to say that I haven't had any disease since. But with that being said, my question really is around something that probably bothers me more than a lot of things in the breast cancer space, and that is, it's my understanding that the FDA regulates pharma and their advertising. And why do we allow the drug companies, specifically the ones that market to the metastatic community, to do these multi-million-dollar ads on TV? Yeah. It is misleading. It's when they come on, literally, my husband looks at me like, I know, here you're going to go again. But I don't understand. First of all, they show women who are, just flittering through life, throwing up their grandbabies and catching them, frolicking through the flowers. And it's not realistic, number one. And number two, if I hear about Enhertu or Trodelvy or any of these drugs, is a doctor, what is the benefit? Am I going to go to my medical oncologist and say, hey, I saw this on TV. Do you think it's for me? I think it is so unfortunate. Yeah. All it does is drive up drug prices. Who pays for it in the end? It's the patient that we're all trying to help. I don't know where this comes from and why this was ever approved, but how do we address this?
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts about that. So first of all, you sound exactly like me when I sit and I'm watching a Sunday afternoon football game with my family, and I'm like, why are they advertising Keytruda? Like, people don't know that they need it or not, or whether they would qualify for it. So I agree with you. I'm not sure what the benefit is. But unfortunately, Congress allowed drug ads on TV. I think it happened sometime when I was in still living at home with my parents. And I remember when the switch happened, because my father is also a physician, and he was sort of like, why are they doing this? This is so strange. They finally took smoking ads off TV, and now we have drug ads on TV. So, but it's allowed by Congress, so we unfortunately can't stop them from doing any ads. However, what we do try to do is police ads. And I have multiple examples where someone's been at a meeting and they've seen an advertisement at a meeting like this where they felt like it was misleading or whatever was happening, and then we've reported it to our compliance group to try to make sure that the ad was less misleading or was actually saying things that were in the label that we had told them that they could say. We also have I've had that happen many times. We've reported things ourselves when we've seen them on TV, and we're like, this is a completely misleading ad. You cannot keep saying that. And finally, we have something called bad ad at fda.hhs.gov. So if you all see an ad on TV, you can send an email to badad@fda.hhs.gov.
And take a picture if you can.
Take a picture.
Tell them what you
Or-
think is wrong with the ad from your perspective, and they will investigate. And they will come to us, actually, the people who are approving the drugs and writing the labels, and say, is what they're saying true? Can they make this claim? Can they say people can run through the field with flowers throwing up their grandchildren when they're on this drug? And we will provide information back to them and hopefully get them to take an ad down that isn't great, or change an ad that we think is misleading. So that is what we can do. We can't overcome Congress allowing drug ads to be on television. As much as we would probably like to.
I can tell you a couple of examples of ones that FDA has taken corrective action against. So sometimes if we see an ad that we think is inappropriate, we just tell the company that has to come off of television or magazine or wherever it might happen to be. In other cases, we actually make them run a corrective ad where they say, you might have seen this ad where this lady was throwing her grandchild in the air and frolicking through the flowers. The FDA said this ad was misleading and required us to, so it's really quite it's a public shaming. And then they have to do a proper ad. So that's actually, that's attention of a sort that companies don't want. Right, but I can tell you, for example, one ad that I saw before it was going out was an ad for something in triple-negative breast cancer that had an older white woman as the face of this ad, and I said, this is not who's getting triple-negative breast cancer. There are exceptions, of course. I'm sure there's some older white woman, maybe even in this room or listening in, who has triple-negative breast cancer. So it's not that it doesn't occur. But this is disproportionately a disease of younger patients. It's disproportionately a disease of women of color. And so we said, you can't do this ad. This is not appropriate. And that had to be changed before the ad went out. Another example, which is not in oncology, was for EpiPens, which are used for food allergies, anaphylaxis like to peanuts and shellfish and things like that. And it was an ad that had a little boy who was going to a birthday party. And he said, I don't know what's going to be in the cake. And his mom said, lucky for you, you've got your EpiPen, which made it sound like you can just eat whatever you wish and inject yourself if you get anaphylaxis. And that is not the message.
And even worse, it implied that he could then go back and join the birthday party and
it,
end up in the ER.
It was a terrible ad.
Yeah, it was bad for a lot of reasons.
It was a terrible ad, and they were forced to do a corrective ad where they said, you might have seen this ad, and that's not true. We misled you by making it sound like you can eat whatever you please as long as you have EpiPens, and that you can go right back to your activities. And in fact, you could still get severe anaphylaxis and die, and you definitely need hospital care after you use an EpiPen. So, if you guys see these things, really do flag them for us, because we are a large agency, but we are not an unlimited number of people, and we're all doing the best we can to catch all the things, but we really rely on people. We're fortunate in the breast cancer world to have an advocacy community that is incredibly organized, incredibly vocal, incredibly proactive. So we count on all of you to flag things like this for us so that we can make sure that they're corrected
and the stuff about the tolerability that we don't think that the person can be running. We may not know that information as well as you guys do. So we need you all to help us, and that's why we have this system.
This relates also to printed ads, if you see posters, you get pamphlets, so it's not just commercials, and anything written too, if it sounds like, that's that sentence doesn't, it's insinuating something like, you're gonna live longer, you're gonna, whatever, you're gonna go skydiving after this drug, you can report that too, that it's misleading, it's suggestive of something that's not really true. So.
And one other thing, there's really two things about direct consumer marketing. This is really what it's called, really irks me, and that is they give you all this data, and then when it comes to the side effect, they talk so fast you only catch the first part. Or the print is so small you need a magnifying glass. For somebody like me who's in her 60s, I'm like, wait a minute, what is this?
And I have friends who are not in the medical community, and their favorite thing to do is to make fun of drug ads and say, you're going to get blah, 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 and death. And all they hear is, and death. And I'm like,
I
guys.
just heard, and I wish I knew actually more about this, but I just heard this in the news. If anybody knows about it, you can go to the mic and give more detail. But I just heard in the last week or so that it is now going to be required for the speed of all the side effects in spoken ads and
Yes,
commercials
that's
to be
actually true.
slowed. I don't know exactly when that takes effect.
It's in effect. I actually
in
have
effect
a
now?
friend
Okay.
who is a voice actress, and she does, like, I've heard her voice on multiple drug ads, no oncology ones, but she said that she recently got, she actually records in her own home, and she got one sent back to her saying, you have to say the side effects slower because we are under a requirement to make it the same speed as everything else. So hopefully that is taking into effect, and as new commercials are coming out, we'll see it.
All right, so as you can tell, we have strong feelings and we agree with you. So we will try to go a little bit faster. It's 12:41, so we have 34 minutes left in the session. So please, the next question from the mic.
I'm Suzanne Govro, and I'm on the Cancer Policy and Advocacy team with the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship. And I've morphed from being a very young cancer survivor. I am fortunate that I am not metastatic, but I have had several friends that are no longer with us that did not make it, and I am an advocate for policy to help you all to get things done. And I have like the weirdest kind, of course. I have metaplastic, which is only 1% of all breast cancer patients, so they have no idea what to do with me, so whatever. But I'm here to talk about what, if you hear anything in the FDA of reporting for late onset side effects, because I'm the new poster child for that. And I have many ologists now because of it. And I discuss it with my PCP every time I go in, and he is aware of it, but I discuss it with all of my ologists if they are aware of it, because more places I go and sit down and talk with other survivors, long-term survivors of all of these side effects that we're having, and then you get another specialist for this or for that. Like every year I get 2 more specialists, but are these things being reported to the FDA, and are you seeing that we are having to go for more treatments and things, and are you aware of these things that are happening to a lot of us who are diagnosed as young adults, like they had the pediatric cancers that you're now seeing, those of us who were diagnosed in our 20s and 30s, that we're now having lots of events.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Just on a personal note, my mom has a chronic neurologic condition, and just year after year, I'm seeing the unintended consequences of the very high doses of treatment that she received kind of in the, in the period of acute treatment. So thanks for sharing your experiences, and I really hear you, because I see what's happening with her, and how it's just like a new thing, and this, you could be quoting her when you're saying, and I'm getting a new specialist for this, and I'm getting a new specialist for that, and how much of my life can I spend meeting new doctors and trying to live my life. So thanks so much for sharing your experiences. I think 2 things related to your question. One of the reasons we're so focused on getting the dosage right early is because sometimes, even if you haven't seen the late side effect, you can see something earlier that might predict a problem that's going to occur later. Things like neuropathy, or, if prolonged diminished blood counts might have, more significant effects later. So if we can see some of those signals later and use them to help and choose a dosage that's kind of a better balance between safety and efficacy, and really benefit risk, maintaining a drug that the drug works, but also better safety, then that might help prevent some of those long-term consequences. The other thing is we recognize that there's only a limited amount that we can know about the safety of a drug when we're seeing the information for approval, and that as more people get it, we might note rare side effects, and as people get something for longer or time passes, we might get more information about that drug, and we really try and update the drug labeling to inform people that these are things that could happen, and these are the frequencies at which they're happening, and that should really be considered when you're deciding whether to take this therapy and how long to take it and decisions like that. I don't know if others have things to add.
Back to the physicians, like as far as like a lot of people are having problems with their spines and bones because of radiation, prior radiation. A lot of that. Is that
so there are
something?
MedWatch forms. If you just put MedWatch in any search engine, you'll find these forms. They can be completed by clinicians caring for patients, or they can be completed by the people actually receiving the treatment and experiencing a side effect. But all of those come to us at FDA, and then there are whole teams whose whole job is really, they're charged with continuing to monitor the safety of these products in the post-marketing setting to decide if the labeling needs to be updated. And the labeling is what ends up deciding what goes in advertising that you see. It's what your physician uses to counsel you when you're making a decision about starting treatment. So I would say if you have a side effect that's either not reflected in the labeling, or that your clinician thinks is surprising, or it's more severe than what's reflected in the labeling, I would really encourage you or your doctor to be sure that that's reported through MedWatch, because it's funny, I actually learn a lot through Twitter. I actually see things on Twitter and I think, wow, that's unexpected. I hadn't heard that before. And sometimes this clues me in that there is an issue, but we shouldn't be finding things in that kind of serendipitous way, right? There is a system in place so that it's not just random luck that I happen to see your tweet and you said, oh yeah, I've had that, and a bunch of my friends also had that. So please use that MedWatch form. It's a great question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I will pass it on because it's very, like you said, it's very rampant in the groups and also in the support groups. So I have that. So that's good. I
Thank
will
you
tell
so
a lot of
much.
groups about that.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello, my name is Kira Gustafson. I represent as a patient advocate for LBCA, the Alliance, and I have a question back to tamoxifen. And so I was diagnosed with lobular, and tamoxifen was recommended to me, and the dose was the 20 milligrams. And then I did a bit of studying, and there was a study out of Italy kind of outlining the lower dosage at the 2.5 is a 2, and then 5 and 10, and then the studies. Can you talk about that? And when I spoke with my oncologist, they didn't even want to hear about a lower dose. So it seems like if you're to argue for a lower dose, they say 20 or the door.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm happy to take it unless somebody else wants to take this. So, so the study that you're talking about was an Italian study that was looking at patients who did not have established breast cancer. These were people at increased risk for breast cancer. So, for example, things like DCIS that are not in and of themselves either early stage invasive or metastatic disease. And this study, in this prevention setting, compared 5 milligrams a day of tamoxifen for 3 years compared to placebo for 3 years. And what that study showed, which was not compared to the standard dose of 20 milligrams, it was compared to placebo, because again, remember, it's a prevention setting. That study showed that the risk of developing a future breast cancer was reduced by about half in that group that got the low-dose tamoxifen for 3 years compared to placebo. And that half, sort of 50% risk reduction, or cutting your risk in half, is also what we have seen in the studies that resulted in the approval of tamoxifen for that indication of prevention, the 20 milligram studies. What has not been done is a study in the adjuvant setting or a study in the metastatic setting. We have no data to support a low dose in somebody who has breast cancer already. So I think that is the concern. I will tell you that my practice has been that for patients that are at high risk to develop breast cancer, but they don't have it, I still tell them 20 milligrams is the standard. It's what's in the label. It's what's best studied. We have the data for decades of follow-up in lots and lots and lots of patients, but there is this study of a lower dose. And my preference is to start at 20 milligrams. And if people cannot tolerate that, I feel pretty good about saying, let's cut it in half or even cut it down to 5 milligrams. I do not feel good about trying to do that in the adjuvant or the metastatic setting where I don't have any data, because the stakes there are very high if it's not sufficiently effective. That being said, if you're on the medicine, say in the adjuvant setting, and you can't tolerate it, and your alternative is that you're going to stop it, as a clinician, I would prefer that you stay on it at half dose or something than just doing nothing. I don't have proof that that's better than doing nothing, but I think that, you know, it makes sense that that is likely to be better than doing nothing, but I don't have the proof of that. And in the metastatic setting, if there's a tolerability issue with, say, tamoxifen at the 20 milligram dose, we do have other things we can try. And likewise in the adjuvant setting, so we would tend to go to those other drugs first. But I think that the bigger point from your point is that if this drug seems to work well in the prevention setting, it's possible that it would also work well in those other settings where patients have established breast cancer, and it's a terrible shame that it was not studied. You know, just like Dr. Shaw was alluding to, it's a terrible shame that people weren't kind of studying a range of doses early in development where we might have learned that we could just give it at 5 milligrams and it would be a much more tolerable drug for everyone.
I've had a lot of friends just quit it, and
I know.
Then they say, I'm not going to try it again, and
I know it.
I'm good.
I know
so
it.
I think something needs to happen, or a newer tamoxifen comes out that is easier tolerated, so people will get into it. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Linda Weatherby. I'm an independent NBC patient advocate. I work with the Alliance, and I also work on the Our NBC Live podcast. And I have two related questions. One is a story from a podcast that dropped last week about a woman who is triple negative, 8 years out with NBC, triple negative. And she is the last living patient on her trial. And the trial is being concluded. First question is, what happens for a patient like that? It's rare, I know, but what's supposed to happen for her? Because she doesn't know what her landscape is going forward. She doesn't know if she's going to continue to have access to this drug that has kept her alive and everyone else has passed. And so then the related question is about compassionate use. And I just wonder, a lot of us do peer-to-peer help, and could you educate us on how compassionate use is supposed to work? And I am familiar with the Project Facilitate through the FDA, but to be real, I wonder if it really works. And as long as pharma is kind of in the driver's seat about whether the drug is given for that or not, in your opinion, is it working for patients?
Yeah, I'll invite, who would like to take this? Biddu?
I can
You
take
guys want to take it? I feel like you haven't spoken as much, so please.
I can take the first part. So your friend who is still benefiting from the drug, she can still continue, usually as part of the trial, if the patient is still showing benefit and is responding, there's still options to continue the drug beyond the end of the trial.
She's not aware of those right now.
It would maybe be, so often when trials close, and particularly if they did not show a positive risk benefit and they're not coming in for approval, I don't know what the drug is, so it's harder for us to comment. But a lot of times sponsors will roll the patients off the study because they need to close the study, but then they can provide the drug as part of a single patient IND and allow them to continue to be getting it. Or, if there's more than one patient, sometimes they'll open up an intermediate access protocol, which will allow all of the patients who are receiving benefit, and we certainly would be very much in favor of that. I do think when the drug company comes to us to tell us that they're closing the trial, because drug companies do have to do that, we would say, is there anyone still on, and encourage them to continue allowing access. The only issue that would potentially be is if the drug company is actually completely discontinuing development of this particular agent. And I think then if they're not making it anymore, we can't force them to continue to give it to this particular one patient who's still having benefit. We would encourage them to continue making enough of it to, until she progressed. However, I think that then she would have to discuss with her oncologist or whoever enrolled her on the trial what her options would be after that. But there are certainly options for her, and she should discuss them with the investigator who enrolled her on the trial. The other thing is Project Facilitate at this point, as you said you were already aware of it, has a phone number. that can be called by anyone, and it's staffed, I think, during normal business hours by someone who could start to answer some of those questions and potentially help her or help her provider to ensure that she can continue on the drug that's helping her. And that's a newer feature of Project Facilitate that actually we've heard has been a great benefit to allowing more compassionate use and allowing patients to get the drugs, because now they have someone they can call to be like, how do I go about this? So.
Yeah, I think most of the time patients are able to still get access. If it's a product that's, say, already approved for some other indication, then the supply exists. If the product is not approved for another indication and they're stopping development, they often have a study supply of drug that's not going to be used anymore, and it's easy enough to let that patient have it, but it does have to be done typically under a compassionate use IND. We'll get that link for you guys at the end, but there's a website, there's an email, and there's a phone number for Project Facilitate, or you can just look up Project Facilitate on any Google or any search engine and you'll find it. And I think it's staffed from 8 or 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. On business days, and what they will do is help you identify, or your doctor, could be you or your doctor, but identify the appropriate contact at a company if you're not sure who that is, to try to gain compassionate use access, help you identify if there are any trials, for example, that might be appropriate, like another way to access that product. Find an IRB that could actually allow an institutional review board if you're at a place that doesn't have one that would allow that single patient IND to proceed. So that has been pretty helpful, and those compassionate use requests that go through Project Facilitate from our side, from the FDA side, are typically approved in under 24 hours. Okay. So it's very fast on our side. So I would just say that she should not lose hope, and if she's running into trouble or if her oncologist does not know what to do, direct either the patient or the oncologist to Project Facilitate, and we will help. We're on the other end, so.
Yeah, just real quick, does the FDA compel manufacturers to participate in compassionate use?
I was just going to add that.
We cannot. So so companies make their own decision about whether or not they provide compassionate use to drugs. There are a few companies, not many, in oncology that just have a corporate policy that they do not participate in providing product, and that could be the case here. We can't compel any company to provide a product because this is literally their own intellectual property and their own, commercial product. I mean, even though we agree with you that a patient who's benefiting and who has been on their clinical trial, ethically, that person should still have access. We can't force them to do it any more than we can force somebody who has 3 homes to say, look at these people on the street, they have nowhere to live, you have to give the other 2 homes to them. It's the right thing to do, but no one can force that, right? Because that's their property. So legally, we cannot do that. But most companies do allow it, and we support it and do everything we can on our side to facilitate it within the constraints of the law, that we can't force them.
Thank you so much.
Yep, you're welcome. Please, next question.
Hi, I'm Judy Fitzgerald from Sisters for Prevention. And with Project Optimist in mind, we're looking at giving a lower dose so there's less adverse effects. I was just recently on a group, actually with Dr. Shaw, we talked about finding more individualized oncology, where some of the things that they mentioned in the paper was taking into effect body weight. And you wouldn't give a child the same amount of a drug as you'd give an adult. Well, some women are quite small, and so we're looking at better ways for PROs. And I'm wondering if there could be something where maybe women that are smaller have worse toxicity, because technically, by volume, they're getting, more of the drug. And I'm just wondering if that is something that could be collected in the future. And then if a smaller person maybe is having worse side effects, maybe even changing the dosing so it's half in the morning and half at night. I just don't know. I've never seen anything before where a body weight was considered as a thing, for dosing.
Well, yeah, so I was thinking, do you want to say that? And then I'll say something. I was going to say something entirely different, so you go ahead.
Say both.
So thanks for the question, and nice to see you here. So I think separate from the body weight specifically, is something else that we're trying to do through all of these efforts for dosage optimization and through other efforts at the FDA is really, I think an element of this is really broadening who is eligible for clinical trials, not necessarily because there's exclusionary criteria about all different characteristics of a person, but the reason that we really want a broad group of people to be enrolled into an early clinical trial is if there are, certain factors in your genetics that might impact how you process a drug. We would rather know that sooner rather than later. If a lot of people who will receive that drug, if approved, might have diminished kidney function or something like that, we would love to know how they process the drug again sooner rather than later. And so definitely an element of dosage optimization is really looking at all of the different variables that might impact how you experience the drug in terms of how well it works, as well as the safety and tolerability, and trying to understand that early so that if there are differences with certain groups of people and what dosage they should be receiving, all of that would be known sooner and perhaps captured in the drug label and then communicated with people who administer the drug when it's approved, rather than, again, learning all of these things later and later, and after people have gotten perhaps a dosage that could have been better for them. And then I don't know if anybody has anything to add.
Yeah, I think that's the most important in the interest of time. So we have 15 minutes to go. I will invite the next person at the microphone, and then maybe I think the people that we have standing and then what we have on the screen are probably all we can get through. If we don't get to your question, there are some of us who will be able to stay after and take your questions, but we'll move out of this space, outside if people have additional questions. So please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sheila. First of all, girl power. Hey.
Hey, Sheila.
I might make y'all do a TikTok because I love TikTok. So
we're in it.
But I am an independent advocate, and I've been living with metastatic breast cancer for 14 years. I just turned 14 years a couple of days ago. So thanks to research and my fabulous doctor and God, I'm still here. But for one thing I wanted to say was Ann Lozier, who passed away a couple of months ago, she recruited me for the patient-centered dosing initiative, along with Janice over here. Stand up, girl, get your back. And I won't go into that, but we did do a survey, and if you want to learn more about the initiative, you can go on the rightdose.org and read up about it, because we did survey 1,221 women, not women, but women and men with metastatic and metastatic breast cancer. And we also had 121 oncologists answer the survey as well. But my question, so please go on the website, flood the website and read about it. But I'm a comedian too, but y'all gotta laugh, I'm stuffy in here. But my question is, what are you doing to make these studies and these clinical trials more to recruit Black women? I know you have programs in place there, but it ain't happening. So what are you doing to make these investigators and researchers stuff accountable? Because you're really not, if you have 100 people on this clinical trial, but only 5 Black people, and you were talking about populations, that's really
agree
not.
With you more.
That's really not showing a true, of what even for clinical trials, even for side effects, if you still don't know the true effect of what it has on a Black woman like myself, or a white woman. So what are you doing to make sure that we're doing more to recruit Black women? Because there are Black women that want to participate, but they're just not being asked by their
we have the exact person here to answer your question.
Okay,
Sheila.
answer, girl. I'm waiting.
Talk about Project Diversity.
So I'm one of the liaisons for Project Equity, which is a program created by the Oncology Center of Excellence. And Project Equity released a guidance in April of 2022 for industry on ways to include underrepresented groups, not only race and ethnicity, but also by age and gender, so that these measures can be implemented by pharmaceutical companies when they design their trials early on, and at least by the time they submit data to potentially get a marketing approval for a drug. So they have to fulfill 5 different criteria for us to approve their diversity plan, which is what we call it, and have a certain number of patients in each underrepresented group, and we hold them accountable by at milestones to make sure they're on target, and if not, how can they improve their enrollment in patients of these groups. And we also ask them to provide measures on how they'll do that. For example, hiring physicians or finding investigators that look like the patients, whether they're Black, Hispanic, Asian, so there's more of a comfort level and trust. Reaching out to the community for so that there's more engagement between the medical practice and the clinical trial and the community. Advocacy groups are a big part of that. So it's a big initiative, and industry's been very responsive. We've received so many of these diversity plans, and they're very open to doing that. I think as the years go forward, you're going to see a lot of more data coming out in underrepresented groups, and it's really going to change how we treat patients with cancer. And it's an initiative throughout the oncology program, not only in the breast-gyn division, but in all the malignancies.
Yeah. Please keep in mind that when you see a clinical trial presented here today, for example, that was designed years ago. So there is a lag time before you are going to see those differences in a publication or in a meeting in terms of having a more racially diverse population, but it is definitely going to come from these diversity plans. I think the one other brief thing that I'll add is that FDA also put out a statement that was addressing some of the sort of social issues that might preclude people of any lower socioeconomic status, regardless of race, from participating in clinical trials, which was historically the pharmaceutical industry had interpreted certain FDA regulations to mean that they couldn't compensate patients because that might be considered inducement, sort of an unethical way to get them to join clinical trials. And those policies were put into place because of injustices against Black people in the past in terms of clinical trials or experimentation. So the spirit behind them was good, but the interpretation of them was problematic. So FDA put out a statement a few years ago clarifying what was not inducement, what was not considered inducement from our perspective. So for example, things like paying for patient transportation to a trial site is not inducement. Paying for their lodging at a trial site is not inducement. Paying for their child care while they're gone to that site visit is not inducement, and so on. And so that is on the FDA website now. Not every company seems to be aware of this, but please, thank you. Please, raise awareness of this. If you're in a position in advocacy or advising a company or something, make them aware of this, because it's not enough to just say, oh, we're going to recruit more Black women. You have to have this entire infrastructure of support for people to be able to participate. It's not enough to just say we're going to put a trial site in an area that's more racially diverse, or we're going to get investigators who are Black. All of those things are important and necessary, but that alone is not going to be the kind of close that final loop to getting a diverse population in a trial. So next question.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Beth Emery. I'm from Alamo Breast Cancer Foundation. And a big issue for us is financial toxicity, which we think can often be as big of an issue for patients as medical toxicity. Would you mind recapping for everyone the restrictions that are put on you on considering the cost-benefit analysis of drugs, and whether with the Inflation Reduction Act changes that allow negotiation of drug prices and stuff, you're hearing anything about possible changes that might include review of, is it worth $13,000 a month for $13,000 a month for 2 extra months of survival?
Thank you for bringing that up, because we definitely realize on this panel, you know, at the FDA and in practice that some of these drugs are costing a lot of money. As many of you know, and you know, may be aware of, we do not take cost into consideration when we're reviewing drugs right now as part of our purview. So really our focus is on the data for efficacy and safety. But it certainly doesn't mean we don't realize how much of a problem and burden that is. You know, we'll have to see over time. I can't comment over time what's going to happen, but you know, it's something that I think everybody, all stakeholders involved, have to keep pressuring, you know, drug companies, lawmakers, you know, about, you know, the exorbitant costs of healthcare on every level, not just drugs, but even just care, cancer care itself, even care, hospitalizations, testing, things like that. So, you know, we're definitely aware. We don't take that into consideration right now. So our review is sort of a very pure safety efficacy review, and to determine what, you know, products to approve for our population. I don't know if anyone has any.
It's not like, we don't take it into account because we can't. Like legally, we're not allowed to. It's not, you know, we are not allowed to consider the cost of drugs when we're sitting at, you know, when we're sitting in a meeting deciding what to do and how to interpret the information from the clinical trial. It's just a limit of, you know, the way the regulations are written for us to work at the FDA. But, you know, as a public citizen, it's extremely concerning, and I just thank you for raising what's really, really important point.
Yeah. So we have 4 minutes remaining in the session. We have one question from online that I want to take. We'll do our best to get to one more, and we may have to answer the other ones outside afterwards, and I apologize for that. So I'm going to invite Flora Mulkey to answer this question. If you want to just read it out and then answer it.
Sure. So it says, when marketing and approving drugs for metastatic breast cancer, specifically the heavily pre-treatment populations, is there an effort to include QOL measures in the trials? It's frustrating to see new drugs come out and value being placed on PFS, progression-free survival, but drugs with grade 3 toxicity like diarrhea or nausea are not meaningful for a person who needs a meaningful quality of life, not just on extension of life for a few extra months. Can it be required to include patient-reported QOL in their drugs for heavily pre-treated metastatic breast cancer folks? And I mean, I think the answer is that we take PRO and QOL data very seriously. We find it a crucial part of the review. Almost actually every review that we have does include this data. It is not always put on the label, but this data is being collected in very generous amounts. And the agency to deal with this has put out a number of, well, there's been a number of initiatives to put out guidance for sponsors on how to collect the data, how to provide the data. We've recently published a technical specification guide that very specifically says how to present the data so that we can analyze it and use it. It talks about how to analyze. We have a core PRO guide that talks about which domains we think are very important and should be represented if they're going to include the data for us to review. And then also we have a number of methodological guidances on patient-focused drug development, and there's 4 of those right now. The 4th one details the type of analyses that we can do. I think in general, a lot of this information comes to us and we analyze it in a very descriptive way where we're looking at safety and tolerability. And again, this comes into our risk-benefit assessment, so we do look at it. It's not always included in the label, and there's a drive right now to get better data and better analyses. Even international groups have been working on how to standardize what's collected and the type of analyses that are being done so that the interpretation can help you and can help everybody to understand what the effect is in terms of your QOL. So the last thing that we do have at FDA is Project Patient Voice, which does take a lot of this information on patient-reported symptoms and adverse events, and you can look at that, and you can look at it by different factors like gender, age, race, and so you can side effect profiles by all of these different characteristics. And so there's a number, like I said, there's a number of ways that we are trying to incorporate this where you can see that we're incorporating it, but behind the scenes it is being considered.
Quite a bit. I think that we've encouraged it for a long time, and at my time at the FDA, I joined in 2015, I've actually seen a lot more quality of life measures being incorporated into clinical trials, the usefulness of which has been variable over the time. And I think what Flora was just discussing is the ways in which we're trying to make that data more useful, both to us, to providers, and to the patients themselves when they're making decisions about which drugs to take once they are approved. And we have put out a lot of guidance and evidence to try to help support that. And then even if we don't think it can be included in the label, we are trying to publish it on our website so that you guys can see it. Sometimes it's just not strong enough or wasn't powered correctly, or all sorts of different things happen, or there's too much missing, but we will provide it where we can.
So I think that's going to be the final word. We're at 1:15, which is the end of our time, I'm told. Thank you all so much for your terrific questions. Thank you to my colleagues for being very transparent and I think very understandable with the answers. We recognize there are a few of you still standing at the microphone we didn't get to. There may be other questions of people who didn't have a chance or weren't comfortable coming to the mic, so we will be happy to take some questions outside. And thank you all to those of you online as well for attending.
Yeah.